everyone. Welcome to the School Innovation and Turnaround Committee. We'll get started. First item on the agenda is a roll call.
Dr. Bofi? Dr. Bofi is not present. Mr. Castillo?
Present.
Castillo is present. Dr. Davis?
Present.
Dr. Davis is present. Ms. Ellis?
Present.
Ms. Ellis is present. Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Mr. Garvey is present. Ms. Holloway?
Here.
Ms. Holloway is present. Ms. Mallory?
Here.
Ms. Mallory is present. Mr. Morris?
Here.
Mr. Morris is present. Ms. Orange Jones? Ms. Orange Jones is not present. Mr. Rock? Mr. Rock is present. Ms. Moche?
Here.
Ms. Moche is present. You have a quorum.
Great, thank you, ma'am. Next item.
Before we get started, I need to just make one announcement. The microphones in the system, in the IT system, is still being worked through. When the microphones are on, they're hot the entire time. And so when you're done talking, you can turn them off, or between meetings, we'll turn them on, help you turn them off as well. So we had turned them all off prior to the meeting, so when you're ready to speak, you're gonna have to push a little button.
Great, thank you.
All right, so your first item is on page 1, item 2.1, consideration of a report on types 2, 4, and 5 charge contracts and requests for amendments. There are 2 material amendments. We will take them separately. The department recommendation is to approve the material amendment to the type 2 charge contract governing St. Landry Charter School, operated by St. Landry Primary School Incorporated, to change the physical location of the school campus from 1802 Wilson Drive, Opelousas, Louisiana, to 1203 First Street, Opelousas, Louisiana, effective beginning July 1st, 2022.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Okay. Mr. Castillo, seconded by Ms. Holloway. Any? Go for it. Superintendent.
Thank you. Mr. Day will make a brief presentation.
Great. Good morning. Can you all hear me all right? This one is very straightforward. St. Landry is a school in its first year of operation. It has always been our plan to move into a more permanent facility, and this material amendment would accomplish that.
Any board discussion? Any board discussion? Any objections? Having none. We have one public comment. Okay, Ms. Debbie Ball, choose to waive. Any board discussion? Having none, the motion passes. Thank you. Thank you. Next item.
The second motion is to approve the material amendment to the type 2 charter contract governing Acadiana Renaissance Charter Academy, operated by Lafayette Charter Foundation Incorporated, to increase student enrollment with contingencies. Revised executive recommendation has been distributed with recommendation number 2 revised. Thank you.
I move approval of the recommendations. I move approval of the recommendations.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second by Ms. Holloway. Any comment?
Yes. This material amendment, the school Lafayette Charter Foundation is the nonprofit board that oversees Acadiana Renaissance. The school is seeking to grow in 2 phases. The first phase would be happening and focusing on grades K through 5. The school is looking to grow from 125 students per grade up to 300, and then phase 2 of growth would be a similar growth pattern, but in the upper grades. As you can see with the recommendation, we are moving to approve this material amendment with conditions. The conditions are that future growth is contingent upon the school being able to meet the required economically disadvantaged requirements, student enrollment percentages, as required by law and policy. As we said here in our actual material amendment, excuse me guys, it is early. We normally go in the afternoon, and I'm just like, not there yet. I'm going to start over. The Lafayette Charter Foundation is requesting a material amendment to grow their school in 2 phases. We have recommended that we approve that amendment with conditions. Conditions related to the required student enrollment percentages, specifically regarding economically disadvantaged students. The school has been open since 2014, 2015. They've had a strong history of academic performance. In fact, they are an A school. The conditions that we are putting on this material amendment recognize the fact that they aren't a school, but also recognize the fact that in the history of this charter, they have never met the academic or the economically disadvantaged requirements. As a very clear portion called out in policy and law. And so what you see before you is an attempt to acknowledge the strong performance, but also make sure that we are not leaving students behind as the school grows. We believe that choice expands opportunity and is agency, and this is one way to do that. So that is the background for this material.
Okay, thank you for those comments. We do have a few public comments. Jean Thibodeau supports the recommendation without conditions, but does not wish to speak. Next, we'll have Sarah Vandergriff, who does wish to speak.
Hi, good morning. Sarah Vandergriff Kelly with the Louisiana Association of Public Charter Schools. It is really back. I'm not have coffee. Rushing to get here. This is a hard law. It's a weird law. It's hard to put quotas on a concept of school choice when, despite all good efforts that a charter school may do to recruit all and every type of student, to know that, every student has a spot here if they want it, you can't always force students to come. So we've always had this tension point of this sort of 85% rule. But we do understand that it is trying to balance to make sure that a charter school is not a bad actor, and is not beating out kids, sort of complaints you hear across the country. So it's this weird balance. We have always fought as an association just to make sure that there's not a bright line test rule as it relates to this, that there's not a harsh mandate, but rather you look at the totality of the circumstances. Are they really serving SPED kids? Are they really recruiting and advertising to all neighborhoods? Are they providing transportation, et cetera, just to make sure that we don't have bad actors? With that being said, I looked at the policy last night. Not sure if it's still the same, but there's one thing I would say for y'all to consider. At least the version I saw last night says shall meet the 5% or not going to be able to grow. We would just suggest maybe changing that to a may. That would just permit you all as the Department of Ed and Bessie to always have that sort of flexibility of doing the deep dive in terms of looking at the school and all efforts it's taking to grow their economically disadvantaged population, that's all. So our request, if it's not currently a shall, that just be reflected as a may.
Thank you.
Question?
Yes, Mr. Garvey.
Yeah, well, let me ask Max, has the policy changed in this respect since last night when?
No, there was an update, but it was just to clarify the language. There was language that was left out. It's merely meant to say that the school can continue to grow if they meet one of two things. One, that for all incoming students, including transfer students, that population needs to be within 5% of the economically disadvantaged target to continue growth. So that's just new and incoming students. Or the second way that they can continue growth under this recommendation is if the overall student population is within 5%. We know that trying to go from their current percentage of 46.9 to the 58.2 that they're required, that's not going to happen overnight. But what we can do and what we have precedent doing is to do that in a stepwise fashion. In fact, we worked with Lycée Français in New Orleans in a similar situation. At one point, they had 5% economically disadvantaged requirements. They're now up in the 50s. It takes time, but what happens is if we can do this incrementally, we can still, again, acknowledge strong school, strong performance, but make sure that we're bringing everyone along as the school continues to grow.
Sarah, you were saying that the policy that's being proposed.
I just read the policy that it shall. To me, it just read, Max and I briefly touched on it last night, of just, to me, it reads like if they're not, despite all good faith efforts, despite a 4.9% growth, et cetera, then that will put you all in a tough spot.
Yeah. So Mr. Garvey, and for the rest of the benefit of the board, the revised policy that we have in front of us actually does use the word shall. It isn't online yet, but it will be.
It says shall, so you want, so I was just suggesting that
It's taken out.
It should be made, so it is taken out.
It is taken out, and
Perfect.
once we are finished with this meeting, we'll be online as well.
Perfect.
This version takes it out.
Yeah, that just permits you all as an authorizer with the charter school to be able to have the flexibility of looking at the totality of the situation.
Yes, Mr.
So,
I'm sorry, I have the handout. It says, may, I thought this version says shall.
1 second.
I thought Mr. Day said it still says shall.
Yeah, that's my understanding also.
Yes, shall is not something we changed in this iteration. We had streamlined the language and the 5% requirement for incoming students. But what you are looking at, what I believe you should be looking at, says shall.
Well, and can I rephrase this, shall versus may? The fact is what the department is proposing is saying that this school cannot expand, even if it's making best efforts to recruit disadvantaged students. It cannot expand if it doesn't meet this, I think you described it as a bright line rule of having a certain percentage. Even if it's giving first preference to all those disadvantaged students that apply. If for some reason not enough disadvantaged students apply, then it cannot expand.
Right. I mean, I take the point about best faith efforts, but I also think it's interesting looking at where this school is pulling students from. 88% or 82% of their students are coming from Lafayette Parish, who has an ED percentage of 63.9. The second highest group is from Iberia Parish. 8% of their students come from Iberia. They're at 74% economically disadvantaged. The third area where they are drawing students is St. Martin. Their economically disadvantaged percentage is 72.4%. When I look at those numbers, I see that this population is there. I also recognize that they are making efforts to change this, and I know that they're not going to necessarily get to that bright line next year. They need to come within 5% for their incoming students. And given the fact that they are looking to almost double their enrollment, they have that opportunity.
Okay, they're pulling from these other parishes, as you mentioned. How far of a drive is that from those other parishes to the school?
That's a great question. I don't know, but they also have a couple of kids from St.
Particularly for disadvantaged families, a long drive is sometimes harder for them than for not disadvantaged families. So attracting disadvantaged families from other parishes that are a long drive away sometimes is not as easy as it sounds.
Sure. And I get that. Looking at their home, what I would consider their home parish of Lafayette, again, the population exists. 63.8% of students in Lafayette Parish are considered economically disadvantaged. The school needs to meet a percentage of 58% of their total enrollment. Under this amendment, they would need to be at 53%. It's that 5% buffer, because we know, again, they're not going to be able to do that overnight.
I would think that they ought to be able to do it. My concern is that I don't think we have ever had this bright line rule before saying that you shall achieve these numbers or you cannot grow. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I wrong? Have we ever had that rule before?
When Lycée was expanding, we did condition that expansion on changing their pre-K3, pre-K4, and their lottery preferences. That was more background work, but unless those things had happened, they would not have been allowed to expand.
That was changing the lottery preferences. That was not requiring them to meet the mark, meet the percentage that we're requiring in this case.
They were required to, they had the population, they were required to have 66% of students meet economically disadvantaged requirements, and they changed some preferences to say of their incoming classes, just like we're doing here, 66% need to be economically disadvantaged. They met that target, but no, Jim, I don't think that we had the right line.
So why aren't we doing the same thing in this case that we did in Lycée? And just require this school to change its preference and say that that is a good enough expectation?
Lycée was also governed by one app and centralized unified enrollment. So the mechanics of it were slightly different. Here, this is an enrollment percentage or process that run entirely at the school site level based on those requirements that they're supposed to meet. They have those populations. I'm sorry, I can't get past the fact that they do, that population exists.
So if the population exists, and if they change their preference to automatically let in first disadvantaged students, then wouldn't that achieve it without us having to say you can't grow if you don't achieve it?
They are required in their contract currently to run a weighted lottery, and it hasn't fixed the problem. They've never met this requirement since 2014, 2015, measuring down from the 30s all the way up to now, where we're at now, 46.
They have been running a weighted lottery?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Castillo.
Mr. Thibodeau, would you come to the microphone, please? Yes. You know, in full transparency, I've known Judge Eugene Thibodeau for a very, very long time, so I hate to put you on the spot, but now that you're retired, I figure your turnabout is very quick, Judge. Would you mind identifying yourself for the record, please?
I'm Landry, and I'm president of the Board of Trustees, president of the Board of Trustees of Lake Charles Charter Academy Foundation, and which runs Lake Charles Charter Academy K-8, and Southwest Louisiana Charter Academy Foundation, which oversees Southwest Charter K-8 and Lake Charles College of Health 9-12.
I'll call you Mr. Thibodeau just for purposes of these proceedings and with all deference to your judicial experience. But you've had a long,
I'm not worried about titles.
you've had a long, very successful history with Charter School USA, working with a number of schools in terms of the network's involvement in Louisiana. Do you have any doubt that that with all the capacity of Charter School USA, that the recommendation that's being proposed by the Department of Education to encourage more disadvantaged enrollment in the school, that this organization will not be able to meet that criteria?
I'm confident that, given my experience with Charter Schools USA, that it's going to make its best effort to reach that threshold amount. I'm just concerned, I agree with Mr. Vandegrift, that it should be permissive may as opposed to shall. My experience with Charter Schools USA goes back to 2011. We've had our battles, we've had our disagreements, but we've always come to the table to resolve those disagreements, and they've always have acquiesced to the wishes of the board, as opposed to being very structured in their approach to these problems. So yes, I'm confident that they will make that best effort, given the demographics of the Youngsville-Broussard area, and I'm familiar with that all the way from Lake Charles. I think that they will make that best effort to reach that threshold amount. My only concern is that it's mandatory that, they built a $40 million facility, and if they cannot meet the mandatory shall, they're stuck with $40 million guilty and no place to grow.
So as a follow-up though, if it were must, you're not going to stop construction if the shall is mandatory. You're going to proceed with the expansion nonetheless, correct?
With that expansion, if we're difficult with that expansion, we'll proceed. My point is that I think the organization, the entity, is interested in the idea and the practice of the schools of choice, and they're going to go out, whether it's Lafayette Parish, Martin Parish, or Adelia, to make this thing work.
Yeah. And so
I don't think that they're going to say, well, since it's not mandatory, we are going to be lax in our efforts to reach the disadvantage. That has not been my experience with that.
and I guess my point is, Judge, that to Mr. Dave's point, that if the language said must, as the department has recommended, given that the school is actually located in Lafayette Parish and has a significant disadvantaged population, I feel pretty confident that the leadership of this organization, with their best efforts, will be able to reach that goal. And I think that if you make it permissive, you know what happens. If you make it permissive, it's not as much of an incentive or carrot to get it done compared to when it's a requirement. It's kind of maybe human nature. But if you make it mandatory, given that you said, yeah, we're going to get it done with our best efforts, yeah, we're going to, and so much so that we're willing to invest millions of dollars to get it done, that I feel pretty confident that the organization will make it happen.
Thank you.
You don't make it happen, I'm just concerned that the mandatory nature of it, even though they use their best efforts, may or may not be achieved, 5%, within 5% goal of 63% and then get membership.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Davis.
I'd just like to reiterate Mr. Day's points about the surrounding population, because that was one of the things that concerned me as I read the proposals. Because if you look at every parish that is contiguous with Lafayette Parish, they range in economically disadvantaged from the 63% all the way up to the 80%. So the student body is there. We talk a lot on this board about incentive structures, right, and motivating teachers and motivating students. I don't see this as any different of a circumstance. And I would like to point out that the bright line is actually spelled out in statute. And the bright line is 58.2%. And we are not in this policy asking them to meet even the bright line of 58.2%. We're allowing them to expand if they come within 5% of that line.
Thank you. Ms. Bochamp.
I was going to say something similar. It's in statute that the economically disadvantaged and special education rate must be 85%, and if it's a type 1 and 3, 85% of those rates within that parish. Since this is a type 2 charter school, and Lafayette Parish is what, 70, you said? 74% or whatever?
Yes.
74% economic.
63.9.
I'm sorry, what?
63.9.
So it must be within 75%. Now, if it's a type 2 charter, that percentage is lowered to the statewide economically disadvantaged rate, which is what today?
It would be the 58.2 that they're held to.
Well, that's 85% of it. So the statewide economically disadvantaged rate must be in the 60s
Yes.
somewhere. So you take 85%. So the target is really only 58.2. And there are many, as Dr. Davis was saying, that the marketing campaign or the incentive for children to take advantage of the education offered at this particular charter school. I think there should be a significant marketing campaign because we're talking equity here. And we're talking really at state law. This is in statutes that it's 85% of whatever the actual rate is. Statewide if it's a type 2 and locally in that parish if it's a type 1. So I don't think it's unrealistic. Even prior, years ago, as we've sat on this board, we have talked about those incentive programs happening for incoming classes. So it's not just to disturb the children and the families currently in the school, but the incoming classes, that there would be a significant marketing effort, I think, by this charter school organization, which is seemingly a very good organization, to attract those children to come into the school and offer those opportunities. And since transportation must be offered, I don't see where that would be a stumbling block either, to go into those communities and make the concerted effort to offer that to the economically disadvantaged families. So I think it's a relatively low bar to be perfectly honest.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have 2 more public comments. Dr. Lonnie Wu. We have 2 more public comments and then we'll have board discussion.
Yes.
Morning.
Thank you. Lonnie Lewis with Charter Schools USA. And just a few comments on it. We are so thankful that the recommendation is to move forward with the growth there in KDM. A couple concerns I have with things that were mentioned that I just want to share. If you look at the population that's coming into the school now, we had over 1,600 applicants for for next year, and we only have 150 slots for those students. So there's over 400 kids for kindergarten, and we have 150 slots now. This would bring it to 300. We've already demonstrated, we've sent to the board in Youngsville, we're way above the ED numbers of any of the Youngsville area schools already. We've increased by 10 percentage points after the recommendations, or actually directions from the department of making sure that we weight lotteries and we do those things. So any ED student that applies for the school gets in up front. What is very difficult is it does feel like it's a poison pill for us, that if we go and invest $40 million into that, to say that necessarily kids will come to the school. You'll note that there's two different high schools that the foundation runs that hires us to do this. One, you just approved the material amendment in North Lafayette, and one that you've approved two different amendments on this particular school already to grow it. I think it's probably your highest performing non-selective charter school in the state. And when we look at that, the reason that we have two different areas, the reason the foundation was going to put one high school in the middle that they shared, and if you look at our numbers, well in excess of 80% at the school in North Lafayette. If y'all ever driven in Lafayette during those rush hour times, that's why we had to move. We're talking an hour and a half at times to get from one school to the other. So to try to act like we're using the Lafayette Parish is a goal, or even the surrounding districts, you have to do concentric circles and look at what makes sense. Do we really want kids on the bus for an hour and a half, one way to do it? We are recruiting. We agreed with the department on several things that we talked through. We will weight things, we'll do all those things that we talked about. We will do the board, we'll do internal audits. We welcome external audits of our transportation program. We will make our lottery program, we'll live stream it. We'll live stream board meetings if needed. We said that we would, that the board will go and do an enrollment plan and have quarterly, have it agendized quarterly, that the department can see that the board is holding us accountable to it. We'll do everything. May we meet the goals? I hope so. We have a shot at it. But on a business-wise, who would go in and spend $40 million in the fastest growing area of the state that needs this? You've seen the letters from the mayor of Youngsville, the mayor of Lafayette that says we need it. The mayor of Youngsville has told you guys that if you don't do this, he may have to do a moratorium on house building in Youngsville because the local district doesn't have seats for them. We think it's the right thing to do. We totally will be in good faith. We think it is the responsibility of Bessie, the department, to stop us or stop the foundation if we're not doing things in good faith. But to put a poison pill in it, who would go and put that much money into something that has the potential to have 25% of the school field? We go bankrupt trying to do that. So we would just share, if you change the language to May, we really don't think any of those requirements. This is the first time it's setting precedent of actually putting any hard things that you can't do to move forward. And we don't think you should set precedent in this. You should just hold us accountable for what we do. And when you do, you've seen the results. We've increased our ED by 10% in the last 4 years. We're on the right track, and we'll do things in good faith. And that's kind of where we are now.
Thank you. Gary McGuffin, excuse me.
Good morning, I'm Gary McGuffin, I represent the Lafayette Charter Foundation, the actual board who's going to be heading this. I'd like to address our experience with the Lafayette Charter Foundation. We have two schools in Lafayette. On the north side, we have the Lafayette Renaissance, on the south side, we have the Acadiana Renaissance. We have the same contractual obligations. We use the same lottery approach. We use the same weighting for our economically disadvantaged and special needs students. The reality is, Lafayette is not an homogeneous parish, and there is a disproportionate number of economically disadvantaged students at the north side of our Lafayette parish. That's why ARCA, the Lafayette Renaissance, has over 80% economically disadvantaged youth. If you look at the southern part of the parish and you compare ARCA, Acadiana Renaissance, which has the application here, you will see that we're within percentage points of our peers public schools. Lafayette Parish School System schools in terms of economically disadvantaged youth. That's just the reality of that part of our parish. If you look at the numbers that were mentioned earlier, 4 years ago, 2018, we had 38% of our students who were economically disadvantaged in our class. In the last 40 years, that's grown to 48%. What is the reason for that? It is not the marketing effort. It is not the change in the lottery. It's the fact that we've expanded our seats. And so our earlier discussions with the department were, yes, it's really hard to change your numbers over time because nobody leaves the school. They all graduate. So our only window to get new students in and to affect the economically disadvantaged percentage is through kindergarten. We had 150 seats. And even if all 150 seats went to economically disadvantaged, that would not change as much over time. What happened over the last 4 years, really the last 3 years, because the last 2 years have been pretty constant, is we expanded the number of seats we had. And so we had seats open in the upper grades that we were able to fill through the lottery with more economically disadvantaged youth. And we had more spending as well. The expansion we're talking about here will do the same thing. It will open up more seats in the upper grades rather than keeping the window at kindergarten. As a result, we're going to be able to serve more students, and because we'll have more seats available to them. The concern that we have is, remember, the Lafayette Charter Foundation is responsible for the charter for the school and for the payments. That money comes through us. The board is quite concerned about these 3 poison pill requirements. One is that you have to meet a percentage to open that you've never met before, and everybody agreed would be impossible to do immediately. And then, to continue your growth in the coming years, each year you would have to be within 5% of that. The end result of that is we're not going to get the financing to build the seats of the schools that we need to accommodate these students. So the end result of that is going to be we're going to stay put with where we are right now, continue growing, continue doing the good work we're doing, but the community is going to suffer because they need the seats and the Lafayette Parish School System cannot provide them. There's nothing indicating that Lafayette Charter Foundation is not a good player, that it has not made every attempt to honor its contractual commitment and to do what's necessary to grow the economically disadvantaged percentage for the southern part of our parish. We simply face a demographic reality. So whether it is shall or may is of small difference to us in terms of being able to get financing for this, because you're not going to roll the dice on what I hear is $40 million and expect to get someone to come in and finance that, and you may not be able to open that new portion of the school or any given year after that on a 20-year lease. Which year is it that you're not going to be able to expand? These are poison pills. We appreciate the favorable recommendation, but it's essentially doesn't benefit us because we're not going to be able to expand the services. Separate from that is if you look at the imposition of these conditions, I believe it's in violation of Bulletin 126, Section 2713. Paragraph H. You have the authority as our charter authorizer to tell us that we are in default, and you have the authority to provide us with a plan or recommendations or processes to achieve the result that you would like us to achieve. This goes beyond that. This puts hard stops in there. This exceeds that authority. My time is up.
Thank you. That concludes our public discussion. Any other comments from board members? Mr. Castillo and then Mr. Morris.
Just a quick question for you. I wanted to ask a little bit about the poison pill comment.
Yes, sir.
Has your financial institution indicated to you that they would not provide the financing if the shall language was included in the material amendment?
We've been speaking with Red Apple Development, which is the company that we use for the existing facilities. They are quite concerned about being able to obtain the financing in the market that they use. It's not traditional financing that they've used in the past. And when you have the reality that someone is going to put this money up, but we, the founders, the Lafayette Charter Foundation may not be able to pay the lease because we don't have enough students in the seats. There's two decisions to be made. One is by the company who's going to build this and obtain the financing, and they're very, very concerned about this right now. The second is our board. Our board is quite concerned about the economic unviability of being able to pursue this, and having a failed school sitting there that has a debt service on it that we can't put children in to serve, because those children don't have any place else to go in the community. So it is a poison pill from that perspective.
Mr. Morris?
Thank you. Okay, I have several questions. Ms. Jones, if you would bear with me.
Sure.
I also looked at 2713, section H, and I saw what I'll call the standard practices being based on my experience. I was a little concerned about setting a precedent here, and don't really understand why we set a precedent here. We're going to start setting, after that becomes standard practice, and you might as well not have this in the rule, in the basic policy. So I appreciate that point. But if we are going to set a precedent, then I want to make sure that we understand what we're doing. And to Mr. Castillo's point, I like to understand if it does continue to be a must, right, and does that kill the project? If it does kill the project, then my concern is that it is an A school. Mr. Landry shared with me that only 16% of the schools in the state are A schools. And so if the project does get killed, then there's 2,375 students that won't have the opportunity to attend an A school. That concerns me. But I ask myself, why hasn't the school been able to attract the student population? Because it is very important. And there's a history that they haven't. I heard the conversation about the demographics and the population spread out of the city and so forth. To get a better explanation for what that history looks like, and specifically, if you guys could share what is the marketing budget to attract students? Is that something that you guys have available, or wouldn't speak to?
I wouldn't be able to have the exact dollars available right now. What I can tell you is, since ARPA, and that's what we're talking about, is over, we've always had a waiting list. Right now, we have a 1,500 student waiting list to get into the school, over and above the 1,600 students we have in the school. So marketing, in that regard, hasn't been a problem. In terms of the lottery is weighted exactly as it's supposed to be if you're an economic.
Right, I understand that. I understand that, and I appreciate that. Right.
Okay. So to address that, we discussed with the department. They had 3 recommendations that they had made to you. And over the past almost a week, we've been talking with them about how we could address these, but not make it in a poison pill format. And that's why we went and said, okay, the board of Landry Charter Foundation will conduct an audit of its lottery enrollment process to make sure that we comply as we're supposed to. We'll conduct an audit of the transportation processes to make sure transportation is not an issue that's been straining kind of students coming to our campus. We have committed a 10,000 budget line item specifically targeted more at-risk and special needs students. We discussed the creation of a board-approved improvement plan that will be effective with July 1st of this year. We agreed that it would be appropriate to review the goals and performance of that marketing improvement plan on a quarterly basis. We agreed with the live streaming of the board meetings. We don't quite understand why that affects this issue, but it's technology we have. It's easily done. We have no problem with doing that. And we agreed to live stream the market enrollment lottery so that people can see how it's done. And again, it would have already been audited. So those are the 7 steps that we have discussed with the department over the last few days to be able to address the concerns and to show that we're doing everything that we can do to improve the enrollment of economically disadvantaged students. So that's the total program being offered. That is on the table through the weekend, and we were informed, no, we're going to stick with the 3 recommendations that you have before us now.
What about, you spoke to your board-approved recruitment plan. Do you have a budget for that?
The board would not need a budget for a recruitment plan. That's just part of what we do. We already have marketing efforts and that sort of thing.
Well, so, but you already spoke to your marketing efforts, right? And basically the message I got was that you don't really have to market a lot because you have a waiting list.
Correct.
Right? So if you don't have to market a lot because you already have a waiting list, then it tells me you're not doing much marketing. That's the message I get, right? So I don't have to do a lot of marketing because I have a significant waiting list. Waiting list is great, but we're obviously not getting the target population that we're looking for. So to me, you have to drive a specific focus marketing effort with the budget.
And that's why.
And I think what this board would like to see would be some commitment, right, on your part, even if it's something like, commitment to a marketing budget specifically for this initiative, then that would at least speak to a commitment beyond an audit, which is what we should be doing in the base case, right? There's no incremental value with an audit, right? So what we're looking for is incremental value here to give folks some assurances or some level of confidence, right? There is going to be some incremental value, and I would think that would require some investment.
Are you, Mr. Morris, just a second, are you suggesting a supplemental motion or something that?
Right, I'm looking for some kind of commitment right here, and that would be an option, right? If they're willing to, excuse me, commit to a budget, right, for a focused initiative to recruit, then I understand you can't force people to go to the school, right? But I think there's a lot of value in making a commitment to a budget, right, for this focused initiative.
And that was one of the 7 commitments that we had offered to the department, to have a $10,000 line item budget for recruitment of at-risk and special needs students, so that we specifically allocated to that effort.
Okay, I'm sorry, I asked earlier about that. You said you didn't need a budget.
I misunderstood your question. I thought you were asking what the budget was now that was devoted to that. When I was making my earlier comments, that was one of the things I mentioned, was that $10,000 budget for recruitment.
Okay, I'm gonna, Ms. Holloway?
Thank you. Thank you. I've once stated that I am very passionate about this area in Lafayette because that's my former home area. Raised, went to school at that particular high school that now is a lower performing school, deed at that school. And always desired that this area would have schools that would meet the needs of children. And that community, as well as the mayor, I think one of you mentioned Mayor of Lafayette, or even Youngsville, have spoken. I've heard them speak about high-performing schools, good schools for their children, and which is a passion of mine. And in particular, this area, I have a hard time understanding the stringent conditions that have been placed here. And what concerns me is, will this affect the expansion of this charter? Or even work very to stay open while making recommendations for approval? And I know as a former charter director, even in the public, look, I've worked both sectors there, I always knew, working with the district, as long as a charter is making progress with economically disadvantaged, and you're showing effort, improving every year with a percentage, that's great, that's a good thing. So I just take issue with this type of stringent recommendation, and so therefore I'm making a motion to remove the prohibition of the growth into this this charter. And if I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever put such stringent conditions on a charter operator, whoever they may be. So Rex, can you help me out with that? I don't know, I made a motion, but.
Sure, and I hear what you're saying. I think in terms of past precedent and looking at the stringent nature of this recommendation, I can't speak to the totality of what has happened, but what I can speak to is the fact that this school currently has 1,656 students, right? They're looking to grow that number to 2,850 by next year. They have a huge opportunity here. What we're trying to do is just make sure that the our economically disadvantaged students are being brought along. kids that exist in that parish, that they can be certain that they are going to be certain of this. And to be frank, the school's been open since 2014, 2015. They've said that certain things have been put in place to help close the gap, and yes, they have done work to close the gap. In 2019, they were 17% off. When we look at the 2/1/2020 count, 19.7% off, so we're going up. Then, when we get to the October 1st, 2020 count, that number goes down to 8% off, so they were closing the gap. But then in the last 2 years, it's expanding again to now we're back up to 11% away from where we need to be. So I hear all of those things, but because we just have not seen the motion, that is why we went with these
Is this the
recommendations.
first time that you've put stringent conditions on the charter? And there are other charters out there that may not reach this potential?
This is the first time that we have had to use the policy levers at our disposal to create the behavior that we hope to see, which is to make sure that they are enrolling economically disadvantaged students as required by law and policy.
I made a motion.
Okay, there's a motion, I think we might need a second.
Yeah, I'd like to second it.
Okay, Mr. Garvey, and the comment, go for it, and we'll come back.
The comment is, just to be clear, we have never prohibited the school before from expanding like we are trying to do here. And I don't think now is the time to change our rules with respect to allowing schools to expand.
Okay. Dr. Davis?
Do we know how many type 2 charters right now are not meeting this requirement?
We can pull that for you.
I guess I'm just, two comments. One, this is the law, and the school is not meeting what is required by statute. And we are not, even with this change, we're not requiring that they meet the numbers that are spelled out in statute. We are allowing them leeway, right, as they move forward. To me, this is the right balance of, this is what the statute says we have to do. This is the flexibility that we're willing to give a school as they move consistently in the direction of meeting what is spelled out in statute. And I'd also like to say, and this is to Mr. Morris's point about marketing budgets, a $10,000 marketing budget to recruit economically disadvantaged students in that parish, that's not even one mailer to families in that area attempting to notify them that you were an A-rated school and to attract them into applying for your lottery. So I appreciate the fact that you're following the rules about the lottery, but $10,000 is not enough of an effort to meet what is clearly spelled out as statute, what you're supposed to do in terms of economically disadvantaged, and let's not forget our students with disabilities.
Ms. Howard?
Yes, just a correction on the motion. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Correction on the motion is the first and second bullet.
To be clarified, please. So the substitute motion on the floor right now by Ms. Holloway, seconded by Mr. Garvey, is to approve the material amendment with the removal of the first and second bullet contingencies and to retain the third bulleted contingency.
So remove which ones again?
The first and the second bullet.
So on the revised sheet that was distributed to you today, the handout, on the back, recommendation 2 will remove, the substitute motion removes the first and second bullet of the contingencies listed in that recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Morris?
I'd hate to see, an A school not be able to grow, and 2,000 plus students not be able to have that opportunity because of this issue. So I could support the amendment if we could get the marketing campaign budget addressed. My understanding is it's a $40 million project. The number I have is $19 million per year in additional revenue. I would think for a project that size, a $10,000 marketing program would not be adequate. So I could support personally, I could support the amendment if they could speak to the budget for the marketing plan and be something appropriate, that we could have some confidence that it would actually improve the recruitment.
Okay, Ms. Boshian.
You know, I think there's some things we need to ask ourselves. If state law, by statute says, even with the inception of the charter, it was supposed to be 85% of both the economically disadvantaged rate and 85% of the student with disability rate, before the schools even opened. Now, we improved, you know, many over the years, many Type 2 charters that we didn't know if they were going to meet those. But each year we are supposed to get, I haven't seen one recently, a report on what those rates actually are for each one. But over the course of the years, we have sat here and said, when schools are not meeting that we wanted a corrective action plan, or whatever we call the plan, to actually meet those targets. And if we show continued growth and substantial growth in meeting the targets, then we took a more flexible, I guess, direction with these particular charters. I think over the course of the years, we said that the gap was narrowing on economically disadvantaged. The last couple of years, it has begun to widen again. So this particular bullet that was originally proposed didn't necessarily say it had to meet it for the entire school. It said the incoming students should meet that. And that would then slowly help the entire rate to rise. Because you're not going to get the entire school with the numbers that we have here to change overnight. Everybody understood that. But if we really believe in equity, and we really believe in equal opportunity for all of our students, and we really believe that economically disadvantaged families should be offered the same opportunities, and if we really believe that students with disabilities should be offered those same opportunities, then these percentages are not, to me, that difficult to meet. If the required percentage for the school economically disadvantaged is 58.2, and all we're asking is that the incoming students, not the ones currently there, not to make the entire school meet that rate right on hand, but the new students being accepted would be within 5% of that. So we're only talking a little over half the kids coming in, and the entire, you know, in the area, it seems to me, if you've got 1,600 kids looking to come in, or I don't know how many spots exactly, 1,300 or whatever the number was, to be filled for this coming year, I would hope that there would be those numbers of students, or at least half of these kids, that would fit that designation. If not, then I don't think the marketing campaign is very effective, because those families are there. And then the same thing, I know we haven't even talked to student with disability rate. We're looking at the target being 10% at 10.3%, the school's at 7.8%. Well, you know, that should, to me, should have been a factor as well as we look at. Those numbers should increase, but I understand they need to increase incrementally. You can't expect overnight change, but it should have been happening year after year. And I think when we looked at this before, it was to some extent, and then it stopped, and this gap is widening again. Why do we support a gap that's widening again? Why can't we say just the kids coming in now, not the whole school, but just the ones coming in, that these percentages should be met? The families existing, and I don't know why there's maybe a reluctance of economically disadvantaged children to go to the school. I mean, I don't know what the situation is, or what, and I'm going to use the word problem is, but we're looking at just the kids coming into the school. in an area where a much greater percentage qualify in economically disadvantaged. And it is state law. We can talk about what have we done in the past. In fact, in the past, we have tried to get those marketing campaigns and weighted lotteries to help narrow the gap. And I would say that it is the responsibility of this board and of the department to track those gaps and to see that those gaps narrow. And if those gaps don't narrow, then there should be some explanation and some action that we should take so that we could be in compliance with what the law requires.
Thank you. Mr. Castillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I made the original motion in favor of the recommendation by the department. And I'm sort of shocked in terms of the direction this is taken. And what's now being recommended is that not only will Charter School USA not be required to attempt to make these efforts, but even in terms of good faith efforts, that there will be no requirement, no conditions, no expectations that you will attempt to comply with the law. I haven't said that. I know Mr. McGoffin, Dr. Lewis, Judge Thibodeau. I respect all of you tremendously, and I'm a fan of what you're doing. I wanted to be real clear in terms of why I asked the questions I asked in the beginning. What I'm concerned about is a slippery slope that we might be on. And I want you gentlemen who are responsible, socially responsible for what happens in this state to pay close attention to what I'm saying. And that is what's happening is that I think we're feeding into a system that is causing us to be more polarized. If you've got Renaissance, which is in my district, and I represent Lafayette, and I supported their material amendment, and I support your material amendment for Lafayette, for Acadiana. What I'm seeing is happening is that we're going back. We've got all of our disadvantaged students seemingly going to one school, and the non-disadvantaged, the wealthier population going to another school. And my comments in the beginning went toward, you have the capacity because of your wealth, because of your success academically, success financially, to do as much as you possibly can to ensure that as many kids get the opportunity to take advantage of the wonderful educational model that you've created. And my initial comments was to work on an incentive to help drive that, which you seem to be comfortable with. We can do that because you've had some success. Mr. McGoffin, you talked about the 10% growth. And the rule, the contingent was 5%. And that you are on the track to do that. Now we're taking a direction of, we just won't do any of that at all. So I'm incredibly concerned that because you have the capacity, and you have the capacity to persuade us to vote in favor of it, that I'd like you to consider your capacity in terms of what can be done to help what we all recognize as a problem, and to ensure that Lafayette Parish, like a lot of other parishes, aren't so polarized in terms of serving the advantage versus disadvantage, black versus white. You have that capacity.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Any other? Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, the clarifying issue that Mr. Castillo brought up, my understanding is that under the current amended motion, I'm sorry, thank you. Under the current amended motion, CSUSA will still be required to give preference, first opportunity to any disadvantaged student that applies. Is that your understanding, Mr. Day? That they will still be required to do that? We are not eliminating that requirement.
Right, that's actually part of their charter contract currently.
Thank you, sir. Disadvantaged students will have first shot at all of these new seats. Thank you.
Mr. Morris?
Yeah, before we voted, I just wanted to see if they would consider the adjusting their marketing campaign budget appropriately before we voted.
Yes, may I speak to that?
Yes, please.
I don't know what the dollar number is, and I don't know what the technique is. I bet that we can come up with an effective marketing program which the board will support and fund. Whether it's 50,000, whether it's 25, whether it's 100, I don't know the answer to that question. If we can couch it in terms of coming up with an effective marketing campaign, it's one which we can document, we can review quarterly as we discussed, and we're glad to do that. We're back to you all in progress. Get confident that.
I think you might need to talk into the microphone a little bit more, people can't hear
I'm
you.
sorry, we have a board meeting March 24th, and we can take that up then to assure. Would that satisfy the concern that you have in that regard, or are you looking for a specific dollar amount?
Personally, I think $10,000 is a joke.
Okay.
Mr. Morris, maybe see, maybe long.
One second. Go ahead, Mr. Morris, just are you done with your comment?
To answer that, we didn't get the recommendation from the State Department until the day that it was posted. And when we started going through that, those were the things that we kind of were negotiating with Max's team, and they didn't say that 10,000 was too little. If we need to go up, we can go up. What is the right amount? I don't know exactly what that is. I think it's more what the plan looks like. So we're definitely open to having those discussions, and we definitely want to do this in good faith. So I agree with all the comments that were made, and we can step up and do it. But I do want people to understand the Lafayette situation, and when you do concentric circles, and that you are holding us a lot more than any of the local schools that are surrounding it. I mean, we're way over on the ED numbers from all the schools that are right near where the school is. We will continue to compete. I want to do that. I don't like the polarization that was mentioned there. That's a big issue with the school board, or the foundation that has hired us, and they stay on our case, Dr. Cook and the whole group, on what that looks like. And that was why we wanted to do one high school in the middle, to try to merge all that together, but the traffic situation, we just couldn't do it. So I'm totally open to that. If you throw out a number, if it's doubling it to 20,000, I might get jammed, but I'll at least commit to that. But I'll commit to, in good faith, working with the department or whoever y'all want us to work through, to making sure and see what that plan is that the board approves. And if we have to put in that additional 10,000, that we already got 10 approved from the board, president of that group, I'll at least commit 10 grand from CSUSA on top of that right now. But if it's more than that, we potentially can do more. If it doesn't look like that's the right amount of money, but we will commit to doing a robust marketing plan to do that. But to try to get people to commit to be on a bus for an hour and a half one way, I don't think is an appropriate way to educate kids either.
Thank you.
May I address a couple of other questions?
Okay, quickly, please.
This has to do with what the contents of the condition and 1 and 2 are.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Yes, ma'am. The conditions of what 1 and 2 are, you're correct. 1 says the incoming class, each incoming class, including transfer students, must meet the required enrollment percentages. I read that as each incoming class for each successive year. Then we go to point 2, and it says all future growth shall be halted if the school falls more than 5% below the required enrollment percentage. Those conditions have not been applied to any other school in the state. Those conditions are not applicable to Lafayette school systems, who are our peers geographically. If you take the total economically disadvantaged enrollment of the 2 schools that the Lafayette Charter Foundation operates, we're way in excess of 80% of the Lafayette campus. We're at 46% at the market campus. You add those together, it's 126 divided by 2. That's 63% economically disadvantaged. There's no indication this board, this foundation, has shirked its responsibility or ignored its obligation to its students.
Thank you very much. All right, let's,
Okay.
yes.
Of the, your 1,600 students on your waiting list, do you have any idea of how many of them are either fit in economically disadvantaged category? And for these students with disabilities?
I don't have those numbers, but I'm assuming,
They changed we didn't know that.
okay. I don't have those numbers, but the fact that they're on the waiting list instead of being in the school tells me there was no seat available. If there was a seat available, then any economically disadvantaged or special needs student would have been admitted to the campus already. So I assume it's a relatively low number, but I don't know that for sure, because we've already prioritized getting those students into our student body. I just don't have that.
So you think that it's just very few students that fit either of those categories
On
on
the
that
waiting list.
1,600 student waiting list?
The only reason that they would is because we didn't have a seat for them. We could certainly get that research done, but we don't have seats for them, so we don't know.
Okay.
But we've always admitted whoever had the weight priority, because we've had that goal, and we have met that, particularly in the last 3 years, by going from 38% to 47%. That's a huge growth.
Well, and the part, I think Lonnie was telling you, the part about it being faulted is not in the recommendation anymore. The new recommendation.
We didn't know that because we were told.
So that was not part of the original motion at that particular time. But,
I wasn't sure what the motion
well,
was, right? That's why-
sometimes we are needed to be.
Well, that's why I want to make sure we're on the same page.
Well, we do in fact have a substitute motion and a second on the floor. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Jones?
Yes. Mr. Morris, yes. Go for it. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I just don't think we got clarification on my concern, and before we go, because others can go one way or the other, just like everybody else.
Tell me what number you want and I'll.
Diligence is in place to address the law. You mentioned $50,000 earlier. If you guys are going to commit $50,000 to invest, then I think that shows that you're willing to make a serious commitment relative to what you're doing today. I'm not a marketing expert, but from my seat, that seems to be a good case at hand. So I'd like for the board to consider something along those lines so that we have some confidence that there is a serious commitment here and it's something that's final.
So anyway, there is I just want to remind the board, there's already a motion.
Yeah, I
And a
just
second on
want
the floor. Yes.
to say that I don't know how appropriate it is to ask, our board ask a charter school to give a dollar amount on an item. That has not happened before, and I don't think that's in our jurisdiction to ask and to have verification. I do know as charter operators or directors out there, you're gonna go back to the table and work up a budget to figure this out. But to come up off the cuff to satisfy a question, I don't think that would be advantageous to you if you say a number and then you're committed to that number, that dollar amount. So that's
That's okay, because it's not in the substitute motion or the second. So can we have a roll call vote on what's currently on the table? And if you'd like to put something forward.
Substitute motion, we're voting on. Dr. Volpe? Dr. Volpe? Go. Mr. Castillo? No. You said no? Mr. Castillo votes nay. Dr. Davis?
No.
Dr. Davis votes nay. Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
Ms. Ellis votes yes. Mr. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Garvey votes yes. Ms. Holloway?
Yes.
Ms. Holloway votes yes. Mr. Mallory?
Yes.
Ms. Mallory votes yes. Mr. Morris?
No.
Mr. Morris votes nay. Mr. Rock?
No.
Mr. Rock votes nay. Ms. Bocce?
No.
Would you like to vote, Ms. Armstrong?
What is it?
Well, right now you have 4 yeas and 5 nays. No. 4 and 5. Ms. Bocce is not here to vote.
4 yeas and, say it one more time, sorry.
4 yes, 4 yeas, 5 no.
I don't need to vote.
You don't want to vote?
No.
Then motion failed. Motion failed.
Does that mean we now vote on the original motion?
Yes, so we now return.
We now roll call,
to
or
the
you just
original.
want
Roll call, please. Or actually, yeah.
Mr. Jones, is there any consideration to deferring the vote so that they could come back to us at a later date with an appropriate number for marketing?
You can make a
Point of order, we can pick this up tomorrow.
Yeah, if someone would like to make a motion to
So
pick
you
it up
can pull it
tomorrow.
tomorrow
I'd like
and
to
talk
call
to
the
them
question.
off the record.
Motion to defer? No.
Even if you vote on it today, you can still pull it and rediscuss.
Yeah.
Do something different.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor and a second, roll call, please.
The original motion.
The original motion's on the floor.
Okay, Dr. Bofi, Dr. Bofi.
Sorry.
I
I just need to get clarification on what we're doing.
Sure, we're voting on the original motion. Ms. Landry, would you repeat it, please?
But, I'm sorry, but I want to understand that the outcome of the motion, of the vote, right? I heard some conversation that considering the outcome could be taken up again tomorrow.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Based on the outcome. All right.
Based on based on
Right.
anything. We'll always pull it.
Okay, so it's clear for everybody involved that there's an expectation from this board that the group is going to come back to us tomorrow. And my interest is if they come back tomorrow with a specific budget for recruiting.
Well, based on the motion and the second.
I just want to ask that to this group and make sure that that expectation is out there. And if they meet that expectation and they come back tomorrow, then that is a conversation that's still open.
We would be much more comfortable of our ability to give you the answers to the questions that you have if you could defer until the next meeting, not until tomorrow. In other words, defer until April. We want to make sure we give you good information for the questions that you have. I don't know if we can do that or not.
I will say this though, if it's 50K.
Hold on, one second. Okay.
If the issue is that we need to take 50,000 out of the budget to do that, I'm going to commit to do that. So if that's what that takes, I'm committing to it now.
Okay. So, Ms. Morris, you have your answer? Okay, motion and second, can we have a roll call, please?
Dr. Bofi. Dr. Bofi is not in attendance. Mr. Castillo?
Yes.
Castillo votes yes. Dr. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Davis votes yes. Ms. Ellis?
No.
Ms. Ellis votes no. Mr. Garvey?
No.
Ms. Garvey votes no. Ms. Holloway?
No.
Ms. Holloway votes no. Mr. Mellering?
No.
Ms. Mellering votes no. Mr. Morris?
No.
No. Mr. Morris votes no. Mr. Rock? Yes. Mr. Rock votes yes. Ms. Boche?
Yes.
Ms. Boche votes yes. Would you like to vote, Ms. Marshall? No votes. Okay, you have 4 yeses and 5 nays.
Point of order. To clarify what happens now, correct me if I'm wrong, Stan, this still comes back tomorrow and can be amended tomorrow as a defer until April, or it can be amended in any
Yes.
other fashion.
Yes.
Correct?
That is correct. Okay. Motion fails. Next item. That concludes your agenda.